Before we start this block, I wanted to go over with something that seems to be a little bit confusing to some people, especially to new quilters, judging from some of the comments and emails that I get. When we talk about patches, you go back to the beginning of quilt making. It was called patchwork quilting. We don't really use that term anymore, but it's the idea that you cut patches and you sew them into a quilt. And this is generated, these instructions I come up with are generated by AccuQuilt, which is a program that helps you design your quilts and figure out yardage and all that. And they call them patches. So they didn't originate the term patches, but they just used it from the old time beginnings of quilt making when we cut patches and sewed them together. So when I look at a half square triangle, for instance, this is going to be in today's block. This is a half square triangle it's cut 3 7/8 inches. It's a 3-inch finished half square triangle. And when I say that we cut the square and we cut it in half once diagonally, and we have 2 patches. And that's because you have to cut it in half in order to put it back together again to make a different look. So over here, I'm going to be telling you that you need 2 patches of each of these colors. So you would need to cut 1 square of the blue, cut it in half once, and you get 2 patches. And do the same thing with the yellow, same thing with the green, and same thing with the pink. So I have this little visual aid here. And let's say we were making a blue and white. We needed 2 blue and white half square triangles. We would cut this square. Now these were cut with the AccuQuilt, so the points are cut off. So you have to imagine this as a total square. So you cut your square, your 3 7/8 inch square, and then you cut it in half once diagonally, and you get these 2 patches. These are patches. And you do the same thing with the blue. So now you have 4 patches. But what do you do with them? Well, you sew them together like this. That gets your 2 blue and white half square triangles. And you have a similar thing when you do quarter square triangles. We aren't doing quarter square triangles today, but it's the same idea that you have 1 piece of fabric, you cut it into a square. You have to imagine the points are here. So this is a square of a certain size, whatever it is, and you cut it in half once diagonally, like this. Then this twice diagonally, which is this. And you have 4 patches. So this is what we mean by patches. And you take these and you usually will put them together in some other form. That's what we mean when we cut a square and cut it in half once or twice diagonally to get the number of patches. So you cut once diagonally and you get 2 patches. You cut twice diagonally, you get 4 patches. So I wanted to just kind of clear that up. I hope it didn't make it worse. Let's start again for our 2 squares for our half square triangles. And what we're going to do today, in the instructions I'm starting to do now, I'm going to add things like to use the half square triangle 2 at a time, cut the squares this size, but do not subcut them because we're going to use the method of making 2 half square triangles at a time. So instead of taking these 2 squares and cut them in half, cut them both in half, and we'll have 4 patches. And then taking both of these, sew that together and sew that together. We're going to do the 2 at a time method where we take a square like this, and then we take another square the same size but our different fabric, and we put it right on top of it. And we draw a diagonal line, and we stitch on either side of the diagonal line. Then we cut them apart. And when you cut them apart and open them up, you get your 2 half square triangles. So it's a little more accurate when you do it that way. It's less cutting for sure. It's done using the same size square as if you're going to cut them into patches or if you're going to sew them together and make 2 at a time. Now on to today's block. This is Scrappy Bows. It's a 12-inch finished block. Here is the block in the diagram. We just cut squares and half square triangles in this block. It is a 4x4 grid, which means every spot in this grid has a finished size of 3 inches. You can make an 8-inch block if you are using 2-inch squares and half square triangles. Here are the patches. Patch A is a 3-inch finished square, so we'll cut squares 3.5 inches. We'll need 2 patches or 2 squares from each of the 4 accent fabrics. Here is the AccuQuilt dies you can use to cut these 3.5-inch pieces. Now for this demo, we're going to be using the 2 at a time method to make half square triangles, because each different color in here, the accent fabrics, have 2 triangles, so it's easier to piece 2 triangles at a time than to cut 4 patches. For the patch B, we're going to cut 3 7/8 inch squares, and we're not going to cut them in half diagonally because we're going to use the 2 at a time method. So for the accent fabrics, the 4 accent fabrics, you'll need to have 2 patches or 1 square each. And I say the patches because if you're using AccuQuilt, you will cut patches. You'll have 2 of the half square triangle shapes from each of these fabrics, and also from this white fabric. Here are the AccuQuilt dies you can use to cut your triangle patches. So we're just going to sew together the half square triangles, then put the block together. And here I just put some blocks together with assorted colors to see what a scrappy look would look like. Now let's take a look at the fabrics I've chosen. Here are 4 different accent fabrics for the blocks. And these are the 2 squares from each fabric. These are the 3.5-inch cut squares. These are the half square triangle squares that we're going to use to do 2 at a time half square triangles. So I have 1 of each of the fabrics over here, and then I have my white tone-on-tone background. I also think that if you used black or a darker color instead of the white, that would be really nice too for your quilt. So these are cut 3 7/8, and we'll put those together and make our half square triangles. But I wanted to show you, to give you an idea of how much fabric you need to make this block. So these are the 3 pieces we need for 1 fabric. And I'm going to lay it on my cutting mat just so I can see how much fabric I need. So I left a little space in between all of them, and you can see this is 4 inches here. So you need a cut at least 4 inches by 12 inches. So this is 12 inches across, a little bit less than 12 inches, and this is 4 inches. So if you have a 12 by 4 inch piece of fabric, you can use that for part of your block. You'll need that for each of these colors. And if you prefer to make a smaller block, you can make an 8-inch block. If you cut your squares 2.5 inches and your half square triangles cut at 2 7/8 inches. Now we'll leave our squares for now, and we're going to use these pieces to make our half square triangles 2 at a time. And I'll show you how to do that now. On the back side of the light fabric, we're going to draw a diagonal line, put the fabrics together, right sides together, and we're going to stitch on either side of the diagonal line. Here is the diagonal line drawn, and then the stitching on both sides. Now we cut this in half along the diagonal line. Then we have our 2 half square triangles. Press the seams open and cut off the nubs. We have our half square triangles done. They're pressed and the nubs have been cut off. Now we're going to put the block together, and it's going to be put together in 4 sections. And each of the sections will be put together the same way. Simple, simple. Squares in opposite corners, and then the half square triangles are touching each other. The points are touching. Stitch all of these together. We'll have 4 of these, and then we'll put the block together. And here we have our 4 units, and we just put them together however we like. You can put them so the half square triangles make a star, or you can flip them all around the same way. And either way, I think they look really pretty. So Now we'll just sew these together and we'll have our block finished. Thank you for watching.